Welcome back to Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidel. Today we're going to talk about tech today. We're going to talk about the one woman's IVF Journal, and that stands for In Vitro Fertilization. And that woman is Stephanie Fry. She's an author and someone who is an expert, an experienced expert on in vitro fertilization. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Jay. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so there you are in your picture. We don't have video, but we have sound, and we have this marvelous picture of you in front of a barn somewhere. Tell us where that is. I mean, because we don't have snow here in Hawaii.
I know. I wish this interview was in person in your studio, but instead I'm in my kitchen in Massachusetts. It's been an extremely snowy winter here, and it's beautiful, but we're looking forward to spring.
I'm sure it has nothing to do with climate change.
Oh no, I don't know what it has to do with, but it's been a good one.
Anyway, so I wanted to I wanted to talk to you to sort of extend the whole notion of in vitro fertilization. I mean, in Hawaii, just a moment for history, and when I looked at the web, I saw that there really was plenty of history about Ryozu Yanagamachi. Dr. Yanagamachi, who was loved by the people who worked around him in the John A. Burns School of Medicine. It was the Biogenesis Institute within the School of Medicine. He was a fixture there for many, many years, decades. And he was doing all kinds of things with genetics, genetic changes. For example, he made green sheep. He made history many times, and he made the news many times, and he's a pretty famous guy. He also developed in vitro fertilization, and effectively gave it away to the world. I think he could have made money, and the university certainly could have made money, but he just gave it away, and now it's used all over the place, as you know. So Hawaii has a stake in that. I mean, and also has this kind of charitable notion in the sense that it gave it away for whatever value. So now you got involved in it. You had the experience, I guess, and decided to write a book about it called the In Vitro Fertilization IVF Journal. But tell me about your background that made you want to do those things, that is, have the experience and also write the book. Are you a scientist?
Oh, not at all. No, not at all. Before I get started, I'd like to say to the people, I guess, of Hawaii, and that when you tell me the history about Dr. and I'm gonna butcher his name.
Yanagamachi.
Yanagamachi. Thank you. I feel overwhelmingly grateful, and I think that most women in my position would immediately feel that as well, because without whatever happened, back then, the advances he made, I don't know too much about it, but without that, my daughter wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. And millions of children all over the world wouldn't be here. So I would like to start out by saying, when I hear that's the first thing I think, is that I'm grateful, and that I'll be doing some more research and sharing it with my followers and with the people who, follow me on Facebook, so they can learn about it too, because it's something I'm not totally familiar with.
Yeah, mention his name. Mention the Institute of Biogenesis at the medical school here.
It's a wonderful thing. And it's funny you asked me about my background, and I'm happy to share my story. But the IVF Journal, which is the book I wrote, is unique because it's unlike many fertility books. It's not a memoir, and it's not a how-to. It's not my story. I wrote and I created it to manage my own cycles when I was going through IVF, but it's really about the person who will be reading it. So it will be many different things to different readers. It hasn't been written yet. That may sound a little confusing, but when you learn about how the book flows and how it's written, which I'm eager to share with you, that should make more sense.
Well, just to put it in perspective, this book is on Amazon right now today, and you can pre-order it, but it hasn't actually been offered for sale yet. And the date on which it'll be available and shipped, I suppose, is March 25th. That's what I saw on Amazon. So it's just it's a work in it's a work about to give birth, if you will.
Yeah, and it's taken me 10 years to have this baby of mine, and it was a 10-year journey. It was a long battle with infertility, a long series of treatments, and about 5 years of treatment. And along the way, I learned so much that I did decide to share it. Sort of, I guess you could say, with the world, but more, I really wanted to share it with other women who are in my situation.
Okay, well, tell us how the book tracks. I mean, what's in it, and what sort of substantive knowledge are you imparting?
Yeah, at its core, it's really a solution. It's an easy way for patients to manage IVF. IVF is complex and emotional, and as the cover says, you can stay informed, reduce stress, and have a more positive experience, no matter what the outcome. And that's the goal. I mean, that's it in a nutshell, but there's a lot more to it. For some women who use it, the book will be an emotional companion. For some, it will be a coping tool, and for some, it'll function like an organizer or a day planner. And for others, it'll be a treatment manual, because it really has all that stuff in it.
Are there other books like this, Stephanie? Is this standalone?
Nothing.
What else is out there? I mean, if I went, I didn't do this.
There are fertility journals that cover charting your fertility, and they do a good job of that. But IVF is very specific. And for a woman going through IVF, I often compare it to a first pregnancy. IVF is all-encompassing. It takes over your life. It's a huge, big deal. So while it's a small market, it still deserves the attention that this book is giving it. And really, and I can take you through the book if you'd like, section by section.
Well, please. Or leave the general track of it anyway.
Yeah, definitely. It starts with the basics. Interestingly, when you grow up as a woman, you are not taught about IVF. We don't learn about it in health class. We don't learn about it from our mothers. Maybe a few of the IVF babies have, but there's not many that are of age. So we're really, it's a blank slate for the women who face this issue. We don't have much to go on. So it starts with the basics. It covers the cycle in detail from a patient's perspective. Now,
why don't you take a moment and digress from that and tell us what it is exactly? How does it accomplish, and what does it accomplish, and how does it accomplish that?
It allows for a woman going through IVF to reduce stress and manage their treatment.
No, IVF itself.
What does IVF accomplish? Oh, we're going to step that far back. IVF, the hope is that it helps a woman who can't achieve pregnancy on her own achieve it.
And how does it do that?
Well, you can go to the definition of IVF, which is the scientific. It's the joining of a woman's egg and sperm in a lab dish. Basically, a woman's eggs, with medical help, are harvested from her body, and this is very simple, and they are then put into a culture medium where they're put in with a man's sperm to hope to create a fertilized egg, which then divides to become an embryo in a lab setting. The embryo is then transferred back into the woman's uterus with the hopes that it will implant. So, and at that point, it would become a pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
That is the goal, and that is literally a tiny nutshell of a very, very detailed process. And so what the book does is it takes that process and breaks it down into 5 sections of a cycle.
Okay.
So a woman who isn't familiar with the process can really understand what's going to happen to her body, what happens in the lab, what happens, with the procedures. So it breaks it down for them into 5 basic.
Do you offer, the decision process itself the woman goes through before she enters on the path?
The book assumes that you are starting down the path of IVF.
There are many
wonderful books. Yeah, that's been covered. And in my opinion, it's been covered well in many instances. Mm-hmm. That there are wonderful books written about infertility, the choices, diagnosis, the different diagnoses that are out there. So this book is very specific to a woman who is diagnosed under the treatment of a reproductive endocrinologist and embarking on IVF.
Okay.
It could definitely be helpful for a woman who's thinking about it, because there's an entire section on prepping for IVF and what it entails. So it would certainly be helpful, but it doesn't cover that decision-making process.
Got it. Okay, so back to the track of the book. So at first you're talking about how the woman prepares herself for it. Is that the idea? And the initial stage of it?
Emotional preparation, physical preparation, financial preparation, which is an issue. And that's the beginning. It gives the basics. It helps prepare. But then the bulk of the book, the meat of it, it's made up of charts, logs, worksheets, and calendars. They're designed to be customized and completed by the reader. IVF cycles are like snowflakes. That's a good one, considering everything around me now. They're like snowflakes. No two are alike. No two patients are alike. No two cycles are alike. So really, if I were to try to write a book that said, okay, here's how it's going to be, it's impossible. It's impossible. So it is a guided journal that allows the reader to, in effect, write their own story. Now, they can't control their own story. They can't control what's going to happen, but they can document it. They can track it. They can use this book to help understand what's happening and therefore aid in decision-making. Because you asked me if it talks about the decision to do IVF. No. But once you decide to do IVF, as a patient, you're often faced with difficult decisions. So the book in itself aids in that kind of decision-making, the decisions that happen while you're in treatment.
Can you give us some examples of those decisions?
Absolutely. One of the biggest decisions that women in IVF face is how many embryos to have transferred back. It's a controversial decision. You know, most of the country, sadly, has heard of Octomom. That is not a good picture of what IVF is like. But women are faced to choose. In some cases, you know, most reproductive endocrinologists and myself advocate single embryo transfer, which is when one embryo is transferred back. However, you know, due to advanced age, other situations, there's often the option to transfer 2 or more embryos back. So that's a decision that women need to weigh carefully because the risk of multiple births is serious. We all know that.
So if I transfer it back like 8 times, I run the risk of having eight kids.
Well, it has happened, yes, and that's not often a decision though. 8 is a number that again. It's not an option. That's almost never offered. It shouldn't be offered, I would say.
What is offered?
It's usually 1 or 2. We're talking more 1 or 2. But that's a big decision.
Yeah.
Twins are a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, twins are a big deal, medically, emotionally, that kind of thing. So that's one of the major decisions that women face.
And you would offer the 2 instead of the 1 because you're not sure the 1 would work. With the 2,
exactly.
you have a higher probability that at least 1 would work. Is that it?
And it's a decision that should be made with the help of the doctor. It's a decision that it should be made, you know, based on many factors, but one that they face, and that is obviously covered in the book. So that's just one of many examples.
Do you have another?
On decision-making around IVF?
Yes.
Yes. One of the other major decisions is what kind of ancillary treatments to pursue. Now, if you're faced with infertility in general or IVF, you are usually barraged with messages of you should do acupuncture, you should try Chinese medicine. Everybody's telling you to relax and to do yoga and to try this diet. This diet does this and this diet does that. You have to make decisions on what's right for yourself in that arena. On what is going to work for you. You know, some people meditation work. Some people swear by acupuncture. My stand is that it's going to be different for everyone else. What works for one isn't going to work for another, and that you really need to explore with caution, not with abandon, I guess. Explore with caution and make decisions that feel right. That you're not doing things just because you're feeling desperate.
Well, on that continuum, I mean, is it that people try these other possibilities first, and when they get down to the end of it, and they've tried half a dozen things or however many other possibilities there are, then they decide on IVF? Is that what happens?
Often that can happen. It happens in lots of different ways. Interestingly, IVF is so prohibitively expensive, and the coverage is poor in most states, that it becomes a last effort for financial reasons. More than, I mean, there are so many people who would do it if they could afford it.
I want to hold that question until after our break, because I think people will really be interested in finding out what the range of cost will be. So let's take a short break. Stephanie Fry, who lives in Massachusetts, that's why the snow. She joins us by phone here on Think Tech Talks. And we're talking about tech. We're talking about IVF, in vitro fertilization today, and her journal, and we'll be right back. Castle & Cooke, Hawaii. Investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state. Collateral Analytics, empowering the real estate industry to make better informed property investment decisions. The Foreign Trade Zone, bringing the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone programs to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. GALEN Ho, a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company. Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island. The Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, incorporating diverse perspectives to design a flexible and forward-looking energy strategy. Hawaii Energy, the state's energy and efficiency program created to help Hawaii's residents and businesses adopt a clean energy lifestyle. Hawaii Gas, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future. Hawaii Pacific Health, bringing technology and teamwork together to transform healthcare in Hawaii. The High Tech Development Corporation, attached to DBED, is the state's leading technology agency. The SHIDLER Family Foundation, supporting educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including Think Tech. Okay, we're back, we're live, we're at Think Tech Talks, talking about tech today. One woman's experience, or at least her journal, about in vitro fertilization. Stephanie Fry joins us from Massachusetts by telephone, where there is snow behind her picture, and you can tell about that. And we're talking about in vitro fertilization, which is really an important thing now for women to deal with infertility issues. And she's been through the experience, so much so that she's written a journal about it, a book about it. Kind of a, I don't know, how-to, maybe a little wide, but it's about in vitro fertilization, and the idea is to teach women who need to know what the experience is like so they can make good choices. So one of the choices, of course, is to do it in the first place, and cost is an element, and as you mentioned before the break, and I wanted to hold up and get the dollars and cents after the break, it's very expensive. How expensive is it, Stephanie?
Well, you know, there's no hard and fast numbers that I would say are always completely accurate, but the general ballpark is $12,000 to $15,000 for a cycle, including medications. It does vary because there are ancillary treatments available, some of which are needed, some of which are completely necessary, and some of which are by choice that can raise the price. For instance, there is a procedure called ICSI, which is would add about $2,000 to a cycle. But now there's newer genetic testing that's coming out that you can add to a cycle that can add thousands of dollars as well. So ballpark regular cycle, $12,000 to $15,000, and that is without any donor eggs or sperm. And that's something that often happens in IVF cycles, where donor eggs and sperm are used, and those can add significant costs as well.
Ah, interesting. So let me back up a little bit. It sounds like a whole menu of possibilities. You walk in there with a doctor, and he's going to talk about what's in column A and what's in column B, and what the tab is going to be like. And I suppose most women would say, well, I want the whole enchilada because this is really important to me, my family, and so forth. So give me everything. Wouldn't the average woman say exactly that?
No, well, no, because you don't need everything. My experience, and again, I can only speak from my experience, is that you don't need everything. And what generally happens is, as you move forward through IVF treatment, you may try new things. So a first IVF cycle is generally a basic cycle. It's often used to understand and to diagnose infertility, because until you get to the point of IVF, they don't see everything. So, for instance, until you do IVF, your eggs are not harvested. A reproductive endocrinologist hasn't seen your eggs, and they haven't been in the lab.
So you don't know if your eggs work until that endocrinologist looks at them. Is that it?
Well, yeah. I mean, using the terminology "eggs working" is I don't know if, I guess we can say that in lay terms, because I don't know if that's the right terminology, because there's no work or don't work. But yes, you learn a lot through an IVF cycle alone. So the first cycle is generally a basic protocol that most women use. And from there, if that doesn't work, treatment is adjusted and tweaked, which is why the IVF Journal is so important, because it's a book that allows a woman to customize for her own self. So if my cycle didn't work, my doctor is going to try something based on my diagnosis new, and I can fill that in the IVF Journal. If that doesn't work, we're going to then again try a new treatment or procedure, and so on and so forth, and you kind of graduate as you go to things. So you don't generally sign up for everything all at once.
So it's a whole progression of steps, and I wonder when you say $15,000, I mean, it's just ballpark, of course, but if you say 15,000, are you talking about the whole progression, or are there multiple iterations of that $15,000?
Yes, the 15,000 is for 12 to 15,000 is for one cycle. And if that doesn't work, and again, statistics vary based on success rates, I should say, vary based on age and diagnosis and multiple factors. But if it doesn't work, then you would then cycle again and spend another $12,000 to $15,000.
So how many cycles would a person tolerate before they said enough of this?
It depends on the person.
I guess so. But would some women go like 3 cycles or 4 cycles? I mean, how do people look at it?
I did.
You did?
Yeah,
okay.
A lot of people do. Yeah, a lot of people do, and that's where the experience comes from in my case. But a lot of women do. You know, I run what's called a peer support group. Mm-hmm. Resolve is the National Fertility Association. They are a wonderful organization that provides education, advocacy, and support for women going through infertility. And one of the things that they have done since 1974 is run peer support groups, which is where a peer leads a group of women who are going through the same thing in a monthly meeting to just talk and kind of air issues. And in my 3 or 4 year history of running my group, I have my 4 cycles has been low and been high. I have seen more and I have seen less, and it's a very long, hard, emotional journey that these women go through.
Well, when resolve sounds like it defines the experience. In order to get pregnant, have a baby, you have to have resolve. And if you went through 3-4 cycles, then you had to have resolve each time. What is that like? You do a cycle, and I guess at some point you find out that didn't work. It didn't. Well, when the egg is reimplanted, that it's fertile, right? I mean, they're not going to reimplant it unless they have some data there.
The embryo is actually transferred. The terminology is an embryo is transferred.
Right. So that's already an embryo.
This is interesting because there is an entire section in the book devoted to just this because it's such a big deal. Mm-hmm. So when the embryo is transferred, you enter what is called the 2-week wait. Mm-hmm. Now, the 2-week wait is famous in infertility circles for being the time that you wait to find out if you're pregnant. Mm-hmm. It's generally, actually, it's about only 10 days for an IVF patient, but it is a trying time to say the least. And one of the things that in my journey you mentioned, you have resolve, you do these cycles over and over again. When you first start out, you think it's going to work. You don't think, oh, I'm going to do this 4 times. You never think that. You just don't. So one of the things that the book encourages is for women to make a plan based on both potential outcomes, right from the get-go. Uh-huh. A plan for a negative result and a plan for a positive result. Uh-huh. And it may seem a little bit negative. It's not. It's realistic. Unfortunately, success rates are what they are. And for me, and I hope for the women who use the IVF Journal, it was very helpful in the face of a negative result to have a plan of some immediate coping steps. What am I going to do? Am I going to, go beat up a pillow? Am I going to have a bottle of wine? Am I going to immediately meet with my doctor? Or am I going to go and have a massage? What am I going to do? How am I going to cope in that moment? Where am I going to be when I find out? Am I going to be in my office? Am I going to get a call and start crying in my office, So it encourages them to make a plan, and then a longer-term plan as well, because it is one of the hardest parts of this process is is getting a negative result. It certainly is probably the hardest part of the process.
Well, is there any metric that comes out of it? In other words, you get a negative result. Is there a metric that tells you how negative it was, or is it just, you know, plus or minus, yes or no? In other words, in order to make the decision to go on to the next the cycle, so to speak, do you have anything other than the fact that it failed in the previous cycle?
You can, no, I guess the simple answer is no, a negative is a negative, but sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, a cycle can reveal a problem with, say, fertilization. Mm-hmm. So if you produce, first of all, it can reveal, I guess, lots of problems. If during the part where woman's eggs are stimulated to produce eggs, if that doesn't go well, the reproductive endocrinologist could determine, well, there's an issue with your, egg quality. Mm-hmm. If there's an issue with fertilization, maybe the problem is with the sperm and egg when they're meeting. Mm-hmm. So if the eggs are good, but there's no fertilization, then they can determine, well, it might be that. There are ways to see what might have been the problem. That's certainly not always the case, though. Often it's just it didn't work. I had cycles where everything was beautiful and perfect, and it didn't work. Mother Nature only works about 25% of the time.
In that 2-week period where you're waiting, you're on tenterhooks waiting to see whether it happens, do you have to treat yourself differently? I mean, would you, be careful what you ate or any toxins? Would you be careful about your exercise, or would it be an ordinary life?
Most women going through infertility are careful about that prior to treatment. The conventional wisdom is treat your body as if you're pregnant when you're trying to get pregnant. Mm-hmm. But during the 2-week wait and after what's called the transfer, and we didn't go too much through the procedure itself, but the transfer is the time when the embryo is transferred back to your uterus, which starts this 2-week wait period. Mm-hmm. You're on a progesterone supplement. It's either a progesterone shot or a patch or a suppository. So you're actually, and some women take more medications as well. Estrogen can be one of them. You are actually on medications to support a pregnancy.
So what you're waiting for in the 2 weeks is...
And emotionally, you have to do things differently. Yes, sorry.
It's okay. I'm really learning a lot. I really appreciate this. Women may understand this, but I don't think men, as an ordinary matter, get very involved in it. But so you're waiting in the 2 weeks for the fertilization to take place. You're transferring the embryo, and I suppose
fertilization has already taken place.
It has taken place. So what is the event you're waiting for?
You're waiting for the results. So what's happened is the fertilization occurred earlier in the cycle. They harvest the eggs, okay? Then they put them in the dish with the sperm, and then they fertilize. They sit in the lab for a few days, and then they go back into the woman's uterus. They're transferred back. From that point, you're waiting for that embryo that was transferred back to implant in the uterus and become a pregnancy.
So it's the
you're waiting for implantation, if you need a word, yes.
And that's kind of a connection, a physical tissue connection between the embryo and the uterus.
That is, yep. And then, I'm not an OB. There are certain milestones, a pole and a sac and this kind of thing, and this is where I drop off, because then it becomes a pregnancy. It's out of my scope.
Now, the elements of this are, there's an egg, of course, and there's a sperm, and the egg ideally is from the woman, and the sperm is ideally from her husband or the person who would
ideal is not the word, but women only make eggs and men only make sperm, so it's pretty much got to be that way.
I'd like to see how that works, if it's different. But anyway, the question is, can the egg be from someone else? In case the given woman's, eggs aren't up to the quality, and can the sperm be from anyone? I mean, can this be a complete mix and match?
Absolutely. Donor cycles is the terminology you're looking for. So a donor cycle, or also third-party reproduction, is when a third party comes into play. That can also include a surrogate, mm-hmm. Which is someone who carries a pregnancy. So basically, donor eggs are available. They make IVF much more expensive, but it's a wonderful way for women who have egg quality issues, or older women who are facing advanced maternal age as not my term, but it's a wonderful way for them to be able to achieve pregnancy. It's also great for the LGBT community, where donor sperm and donor eggs often come into play for gay parents to start families.
Yeah, and that's one reason why IVF is important now. On the fact that the market is greater, don't you think?
Oh yeah, I mean it's interesting. People, when they hear how many cycles there are in the U.S. a year, often think, oh, that's all. The most recent statistics, and they're not super recent, they come from the CDC, and it's based on IVF clinics in the U.S. reporting how many cycles they do a year. It's about 150,000, and that's a couple years old. 150,000 cycles a year in the U.S. And that, to me, also seems very low. I tend to think it's somehow more. But
are these the doctors who do these cycles? Are the doctors who do these cycles always OBGYN? I mean, or rather, put it this way: are they specialists in doing these cycles?
Yeah.
You wouldn't go to an ordinary OBGYN for a thing like this. You would go to somebody who specializes in IVF.
Yes, a reproductive endocrinologist is the doctor that would specialize in IVF. Many REs, as we call them, are also OBs, and they have that as well. And many are also surgeons. For instance, my RE was a surgeon as well. But a reproductive endocrinologist is someone who specializes in endocrinology, the endocrine system, the hormonal system, and they also perform the procedure of IVF. So yes, you absolutely go to an RE. You are generally a woman. The way it works is a woman who is experiencing infertility, can't get pregnant for whatever reason, is generally referred by her OB to an RE. Is that enough acronyms?
Got it. Yes, well, it's okay.
No, I know.
I think people
and that's how it
understand
generally works.
Let's take a short break, Stephanie, because I want to come back and and ask you exactly what the pregnancy is like and whether it's different than a fully natural pregnancy once the attachment is complete and the endocrinologist tells you that we are now connected here and we're going forward with a pregnancy. I'd like to know how that pregnancy differs from a completely natural pregnancy. That's Stephanie Fry. She's in Massachusetts in the snow, talking to us about IVP and her book, which is will be, well, I guess it's already on pre-sales at Amazon. It's called IVF Journal. Okay.
Also Barnes & Noble.
And also Barnes & Noble. Thank you, Stephanie. We'll be right back after this break.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidel. This is Think Tech Talks, here on a given Friday, talking about tech today on One Woman's IVF Journal. And it's Stephanie Fry in Massachusetts, who has had the experience and experted herself on IVF. So the question left hanging was, suppose now you go back to the doctor and he says, it worked. How about that? This cycle, was successful and you are now officially pregnant. It attached to the uterus. So we're going to go forward. You're going to have, a regular pregnancy or a pregnancy. And my question to you, Stephanie, is what kind of pregnancy is that? Is it a regular pregnancy or is it different in some way?
It's an absolute regular pregnancy, but there is a term that I'll share with you, and that's pregnancy after infertility. So pregnancy after infertility or loss, it's sometimes called for women who have miscarriages, is, in my opinion, different from normal pregnancy. I've worked with many women who've gone through this. Resolve, as I mentioned before, which has peer group, actually has dedicated groups for women who are pregnant after infertility. Because the struggle to get pregnant and the oftentimes experience with loss in miscarriage is so severe and emotional, often a pregnancy after infertility is very trying. There's a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. It took so much to make that baby. Now
so
you
you're
gotta
worried
keep that
about
baby.
losing the baby, and
You're
you'll
worried.
take any step to
You're
avoid
worried.
losing. You
You're
don't want to go
nervous.
through it
Yep.
again. Yeah.
Yep, and often you are on medication for the first trimester, progesterone, as I mentioned earlier. So there's medications, and the way it works is you remain with that clinic, the IVF clinic where you became pregnant, in your reproductive endocrinologist, generally through about the 7th or 8th week of your pregnancy when an ultrasound is done to confirm a viable pregnancy. At that point, you're released to your OBGYN. And it's an interesting time for an infertility patient because you've been in this clinic environment where you're very, well taken care for, and you're talking to your doctors and nurses every day throughout your cycle, and you have all this information and data, and then you're kind of quickly put back into a general patient population. And it can feel very, disconcerting, so very strange for some. It did for me. It certainly did for me. So and then you're just pregnant, and you're kind of left to fend for yourself. The good news is there are lots of great books about pregnancy and lots of great resources, and
you would tend to make
normal
yourself
pregnancy from then on out.
You would tend to make yourself an expert on it, as you have, and you would tend to be cautious about it because you don't want to go through the cycles again. And I mean, would you as an individual, did you as an individual take special steps to, protect yourself from who knows what risk?
I don't think I differed from women who, most women I know who get pregnant, whether it's through infertility treatment or naturally, are pretty adamant about protecting themselves from toxins and pesticides and any of that stuff. All of the normal pregnancy rules apply. And I don't see much difference between, aside from a higher level of maybe fear and anxiety, I don't see much difference between a normal, natural pregnancy and a fertility treatment pregnancy.
You talked about that before in this discussion about the fear and anxiety, and I always want to know what the problems are, what the risks are, what the challenges, and in this case, I guess the discomfort is. Using this technology, I mean, what do you worry about? What does the doctor worry about? And what kind of emotional, sleigh ride is it for you in that period?
The emotional aspects of infertility and IVF are so great, Jay, that we could talk for hours. It's a roller coaster. It's an unbelievable life-changing event. I can't tell you how deeply it affects the women that are going through it. And that's where I'm going to leave it, because honestly, we don't have that kind of time.
Do you need a psychologist or a psychiatrist to help you through it?
I recommend it. I highly recommend it. I think that's why I run the peer support group that I do. That's another form of support. The book itself, the IVF Journal, actually has in it a mind-body section that includes a resource guide so women can build their own support systems, including a therapist, including a peer group. Whatever they feel comfortable with, that they should get that support. They should find people who understand, because it's incredibly emotional and intense for most women. And I say most because there are some that say, oh, I'm doing IVF and I do one cycle and it's easy, but for most people it's a very big deal. And it deserves to be treated that way.
I suppose I could carry that forward a little and say, is the relationship between the mother and the child now, or the family and the child, husband, wife, whoever, the partners and the child, different in the case of an IVF child and a natural child, and how does that work out?
I think that's a loaded question. I think that that all parents feel so connected to their children that it's really hard to distinguish and to put labels on that kind of thing. I do think that for me, my experience as a parent is different because of what I went through. I can't speak for everyone, but I do think that, yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I will say, there's also some risks. You mentioned risk. There is physical risk in an IVF cycle.
Oh, I want to know about that. What is that?
Okay. It's not too bad, first of all, but there are some physical risks associated with IVF. So the procedure itself, in the book actually doesn't cover it in depth. It's a page or two because really it's not massive. And when you start an IVF cycle, your RE will go through the potential risks. So I'm going to pull up my list of them right from the book. One of the basic risks is an IVF cycle involves mild anesthesia. When you go for your egg retrieval, you're put under. So there's an inherent risk in that. You know, it's fairly minor, that kind of thing. That kind of thing exists. There is a risk from using the medications, what are, I guess, commonly known as stimulation medications, which stimulate the ovaries to produce multiple follicles and multiple eggs. One of those is something called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. It is a syndrome where your ovaries become swollen and painful, and you can experience, you know, abdominal pain and bloating, nausea, vomiting. It generally goes away in a couple days. I had it once. It really wasn't a big deal in retrospect. At the time, it probably was. And it's not a risk that is going to really harm a woman. It can in very, very, very rare cases. But in some cases, it can cancel a cycle if it becomes exaggerated. Your cycle could be canceled. Then there's also always the risk of multiple pregnancies, which we talked about earlier in our conversation. So that's a risk as well. That's pretty much really it. So it's not super risky at all from a medical perspective. You know, the challenges, though, like you said, the challenges are emotional and they're financial. There's a massive financial challenge to do IVF.
Now, how much does insurance cover on this sort of thing? Will it cover the whole $12,000 or $15,000? Will it cover? How many times will it cover that? Where do you run out of gas?
Oh, Jay, it's another place where the book allows the reader, the IVF Journal allows the reader to completely research, document, and organize their insurance. Because in the United States, and we could talk about other countries later because that's different too, but in the United States, about 15 states have what's called mandated infertility coverage. And of those 15 states, the mandates, which dictate the coverage, are different in every state. Oh, gee. So yes, and they cover, and then to make it more confusing, it depends on your employer's health plan. Okay, so it really is a very, very individual situation. Bottom line, most people do not have coverage. I think the last statistic I saw, and it's old, was about 85% of women pay for their cycle in full. I was lucky enough to live in Massachusetts, which has the best infertility mandate in the country. And my cycles were mostly covered, and most women in Massachusetts, and I say most because it's certainly not all, have coverage for up to 3 cycles, and I'm really generalizing here. So, because again, it's impossible to say for sure. And one of the things I am working really hard for, in conjunction with Resolve, which is the National Fertility Association, is that infertility coverage improves across the board for women in this country. There's something called National Advocacy Day that happens in D.C. I believe it's May 8th this year. So we're working hard to get more coverage.
2 things flow out of that for me. One is the fact that the word journal, at first, as you know, I thought the word journal denoted that you had scholarly articles, scientific articles in this book, and it was like a medical journal or a scientific journal. But no, it's a journal, and it's just a book, and you can buy it for $15 pre-order and $20 later on. But then I thought, well, maybe it's Stephanie Fry's journal, and this is how her experience was. And she sort of takes you down her own path. And now I realize what the word journal really means. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it's the journal of the reader. It allows the reader to create her own timeline and her own journal about how to proceed down the path. Am I right about that?
You got it, Jay. And if I have one hope for this book, and it's that in the midst of this emotional and physical roller coaster that I'm telling you about that we don't even have time to talk about, I hope that every woman who reads it and uses it takes from it what she needs and makes it her own book. So it's her book, it's not mine.
And the second point that comes at me is that on a larger scale, the second point that comes at me is that you're very involved in this. You're in the Resolve organization. You've gone to the trouble of writing the book. You're speaking to people. You're on this program right now. You've come out on this issue. Isn't it mostly a personal thing? Why have you gone public? What makes this so important that you would, become a national figure in it?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, and for my husband and I, it's a very personal journey. Our road was long enough that it happened gradually. And what happened for me was that when I got involved with Resolve and Resolve New England, I found that was more important. And one of the things that the book opens with is that I'm proud of what I've done. I've worked hard. The women who do IVF are strong, and they're gutsy, and they work really hard. Mm-hmm. And they should be proud of it.
So, the other thing I wanted to just address with you for a minute before we have 4 minutes left, and I wanted to explore this on a kind of public policy level. And maybe there's been a lot written about it, but I haven't seen it. And that is how our society is changing. How, living in the toxicity of the 21st century, a lot of women would like to get pregnant, but, can't. And unless they try something like, your book, as a matter of just the way the world works, they don't and won't. And a lot of women get involved in careers and they don't have kids. They never even address the question of fertility. They're happy enough not being fertile, or they prevent fertility in some way. So I guess the question is, why do I care about this? Why is society interested in this? How is society changing so that this book has a relevance? I guess it's related to the question of why are you into Resolve, but I'd just like to know the public policy issues that underlie IVF these days in this country.
Public policy throws me off a little about the question. I think that public policy around IVF, it's, I guess, the question of women's fertility. The idea of women's fertility has always been so personal that bringing it out into the open is in itself controversial. So there isn't a lot of policy around IVF and other fertility treatments. It doesn't really exist. So there are battlegrounds, if you will, that's fairly drastic, forming, and people who are for or against things like personhood, which is the idea that an embryo is a person at the time of conception. Personhood bills threaten infertility treatment in the U.S. across, and a few have come up and been thankfully defeated with the help of Resolve. So that's one public policy issue that I think that we could maybe classify as that. The other thing that I think is affecting more women, not just women who are going through infertility, is the recent advancement of egg freezing. I don't know if you've heard about this, but most people have, because women now in their 20s and 30s, like you mentioned, women are choosing to delay, having families. Their mothers are getting older and older, and now they have the option of freezing their eggs. It's not cheap, but it's certainly an option. And that brings more people into the conversation. That brings women and men into the conversation about fertility and infertility that wouldn't have been there normally. And I, for one, think that's a good thing. I think the more people talking about it, the better. It helps educate women. Most women don't know that, at 30, your fertility begins to decline, and rapidly. There's this idea that you can get pregnant when you're 40, no problem. That's certainly not true. So I think that is in the realm of the public right now, and that's a good thing. I don't know if that answers the question, but I tried.
No, not bad. I mean, there's a lot of considerations, and one of them that arises from what you said is the whole thing about menopause. And are you saying, I mean, is there any substance to the thought that with this technology and freezing the egg and so forth, you can push menopause, you can push infertility by reason of age, further down the track? Does this mean that
I didn't think menopause, because menopause is farther along. Yes, I think that egg freezing can help. I think it's a new science, so I guess I can't speak with any clarity on it. But I think that if there is a woman who is young enough to still freeze viable eggs, that it can give her some leg up, I guess, on the competition with herself on the aging process of fertility. I don't think it's at all something that you can say unequivocally, yes, that'll work, because that would be unrealistic.
It's about giving options.
I think it can help. I hope. I think that if my daughter found herself in a situation, I would recommend it. I would hope that women all over the world take advantage of anything they can to preserve their fertility. And also, egg freezing can be really helpful for people who are facing chemotherapy treatment, for women who are facing chemo and other treatments that can damage their ovaries and eggs. Sure. Egg freezing prior to treatment can help significantly there.
Very interesting. Gee, it sounds like a very interesting book. It's on sale now at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's not an expensive book, considering the kind of expense you would have if you elected to go forward with IVF. The book is cheap. That's Stephanie Fry. She joins us by telephone in snowy Massachusetts. So we're talking about IVF Journal, which is a journal of the reader, actually, here on Think Tech Talks, talking about tech on Friday. I'm very impressed with your discussion and your book, Stephanie. I wish you well in it, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Well, thank you, Jay. And also, I don't know if you know, but the Society of Assisted Reproductive Technologists annual conference is in Hawaii in October. So if I go, I'll look you up.
Please. We can have
one of the biggest
conversation.
conferences for REs in the world, and it's in Hawaii in October. You should definitely check it out.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie Fry. As we say,
have
aloha.
A great day.
Aloha.
Okay, you too. Aloha.